Welcome back. WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and WNST.net. We are live on Radio Row, all things Super Bowl 53. All brought to you by our friends at LifeBridge Health Sports Medicine Institute in Owings Mills. We'll have the good doctors on again next week. And, of course, you've seen Cal Ripken up on the billboards, and we've talked a lot of head and health recovery here this week, and we'll be talking about all things Tom Brady and all things Jared Goff and all things Rams. But meantime, the Ravens continue their business in the backside of the Senior Bowl, and John Harbaugh's deal now an extension. Luke, we're going to have an Eric DeCosta press conference for the very first time. Someone will stand up and speak for the organization that isn't Ozzie Newsome. So, and this is a same guy. We've known Eric forever, but this is a time where I think we all sort of monitor the organization and say, how is this going to be different than what it's been? And where do we go forward? And where's Ozzie in all of this, which I think is the strangest thing, and I know everyone's talked about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's such a unique situation that the Ravens find themselves in at this point. We've talked about John Harbaugh. He's under contract now for the next 4 years. And the Ravens have a new quarterback, of course, with Lamar Jackson. And they have a new general manager who's not new in the sense that he's been with the organization since its inception in 1996 here in Baltimore. But this is going to be the first time that Eric DeCosta is in the captain's chair. And for as much as we've talked about him over the years, and as individuals like you who've covered the team since the beginning have gotten to know him over time, it is going to be a different dynamic. And I think for any Ravens fan who has heard about DeCosta and certainly seen the work that he's put in on the scouting side, on the draft, all of those responsibilities that he gained over time to eventually be Ozzie's right-hand man, what does this thing look like now with him in charge? And I think there's an overwhelming assumption of optimism that it's going to be really good, and I think there are plenty of reasons to like it with what Eric DeCosta has done and how well respected he is around the league.
Well, he's turned down 10 jobs.
Right.
Literally.
So that doesn't happen by accident. But there is still the question, in the same way that we are going to be asking the same questions of Mike Elias after working with Luno in Houston and working in St. Louis prior to that. This is his first shot at running the show. This is Eric DeCosta's first shot in that way. So for me, what I continue to go back to is how different will this thing be? Not that I expect him to turn the organization on its head.
Well, the feeling is it won't be much different at all. That's my gut instinct of being around, and it's for Eric to dispute that or do things differently, and obviously you're not going to say, well, what would you do differently than Ozzie? That's a weird question to ask, right?
It is,
I mean,
but it's a fair question.
It's a very fair question,
especially if you look
right?
since Super Bowl 47, and that's not to completely beat up Ozzie. He's a Hall of Fame executive. I've said that over and over, but
we put Ed Reed in the Hall of Fame this week, right?
But let's also not pretend that the last 6 years have been smooth, that the last 6 years have been as successful as the previous, the first 5 with John Harbaugh and Joe Flacco, and now entering the post-Joe Flacco era. It is fair to ask what's going to be different, because I'd like to see Eric DeCosta have new ideas. I don't want him to be exactly like Ozzie Newsome, because first of all, where's the fun in that? Second of all, how are you growing as an organization? My gut, and based on things that Eric has said in the past, even though he's not going to jump into specifics, I think he is more analytics-minded, and I think that's something that will be interesting to see how that's implemented, because football is still at a very infant stage compared to where baseball is now. 20 years into the Moneyball era and going back even to the early 80s.
But it's really one of these things. We have all this data. There's plenty of data in football. What does it mean?
How do you filter it?
What does it mean?
And what is valuable, what is not valuable, what's just noise? And I think that some teams are more advanced than we probably think, and they're clearly going to keep that on the down low, and then other teams are trying to figure this out. And then you probably have some teams that are still in the dark ages, not really dealing with that, and they're still trying to evaluate
probably
like
the Raiders
did 20 years ago. Well,
or the Bengals.
Right, it's a fair question.
The usual suspects.
Yeah,
right?
Sure. So I am fascinated to see how this turns out, and I'd like to see Eric DeCosta when he speaks with the media this week, and the first question that would come to mind for me if I was sitting in Owings Mills is, with all due respect and understanding the great respect that you have for Ozzie Newsome and how much you've learned from him over the years, and not even saying it's
were there times you thought he was soaking wet?
Not quite in that context, but not even saying that it's an Ozzie thing here, but what would you like to tweak about this organization? You're in the captain's chair now. You can't expect him to say,
well, Ozzie was the one that drafted Brashad Perriman.
Exactly. But what would you like to see get better? What needs to change? What needs to evolve? And not because of Ozzie Newsome, but just things that you've been part of that needs to evolve and improve and get better. And I know that he's probably not going to jump into very specifics with that.
Self-scouting mode.
But I'm fascinated to see what that looks like, because I think this organization does need to evolve. And we've talked about the over-reliance or the overemphasis placed on the defense in this constant offense-driven NFL that we've seen appear over the last decade especially. So,
well, they are going to be doing with familiar people, right? Like, so as much as we talk about the Patriots having this stability, or the Steelers, or, I guess at one point we always talked about the Eagles with Andy Reid, or these stable franchises, the Ravens have now made a move at the general manager spot from within and held on to their head coach for 4 more years.
Right.
They've remarried a marriage that began with Eric being one of the guys very enthusiastically, by the way, picking John Harbaugh in 2008, back in the day when that happened. Still, I would think, we have to believe, because there's probably 50 million reasons to keep John Harbaugh around, that Eric DeCosta better still be really enthusiastic about John Harbaugh, right?
And that's really where it comes to
because we all wondered about that, and I know one of our competitors who used to run a really lousy organization 38 miles south of us that still sucks as much as their radio station sucks. And, 2 weeks ago was Eric and John don't like each other. That's what's going on a radio station in our marketplace from someone who's a well-placed NFL expert who's no longer in the industry. But these were the rumors that get started that Eric can't live with John Harbaugh, and they've just re-upped for their whole tenure. Or what Eric's got to think, if we suck over the next 4 years, it's going to be John's fault, my fault, Lamar's fault. There are people to blame here. I don't think anybody around there feels like they got a job for life with Steve Bisciotti. That this is a 4 or 5 year deal here. It's Eric's first chance, and he's going into his first chance with John Harbaugh and with Lamar Jackson and saying, this is how I'm going to wind up here. That unto itself is a hell of not an admission, but a direction. They have set sail now in a way that 3 weeks ago, when you and I left and they lost to the Chargers and we're like, holy hell, they just got embarrassed at home in a playoff game. Well, Marty went, right? Marty's off the boat.
Sure.
And you're trying to say, how else?
Joe Flacco's going to be gone.
Oh, and we're thinking, is Harbaugh taking the Dolphins' job? That was still part of that at that
Are the
point.
Ravens maybe more inclined to listen to trade offers if those come to fruition? But
so all that's gone now. So there has been a little bit of they've created a direction, and for that, that's where we are.
And this really goes back to Steve Bisciotti. I mean, how well John Harbaugh and Eric DeCosta get along. I mean, look, there are going to be disagreements with everyone. Ozzie Newsome had disagreements with John Harbaugh. Eric DeCosta has had disagreements with John Harbaugh. Eric DeCosta and Ozzie Newsome, for as much as they are linked at the hip, and they've both have said they're best friends, they've disagreed. I mean, if you don't have disagreements at the top with your decision makers, you're probably not very good, unless the guy who's at the very top is some kind of flawless, perfect.
Disagreements don't have to turn into FU. Disagreements are, my wife and I have them all the time. I like the small fork. She likes the big fork. We just do it. You know what I mean? Literally.
But it comes down to how well do you communicate? How do you work through those disagreements? And if you're Steve Bisciotti, and this is why John Harbaugh cleared this up on Friday. It was a fair question to ask because the extension was taking such a long time. The question was asked, has anything changed about your job title in terms of power, in terms of influence on the 53-man roster? Which anytime you have a coach who's been in one place for a decade plus, that's a natural question to ask. Does that individual want more influence? Harbaugh very quickly dispelled that notion, and the Ravens have, under Steve Bisciotti, have never really acted. They've never really made decisions in a silo or.
Well, they've never had a guy picking a player that thought, if I F up this draft, I'm out of here. Yeah, like they've never, they haven't, and we always talk about that. When we're at the Combine every year, there's 12 different voices and 12 different organizations, and around here there's either Ozzie and John or Ozzie and Brian, and that's all there ever is. In the same way there was only Marvin and Cincinnati. That sort of deal. We had a draft coming up in 12 weeks. There are 10 guys drafting for their lives, right? The Ravens have never drafted that way.
Yeah, and I think
they've never acted like that as an organization.
But they have to work. It's a partnership. It's not as though Eric DeCosta, yes, he has the final say, but when you look at how the Ravens have always operated, coaches talk to scouts, scouts talk to coaches, scouts talk to the general manager. It's never acted in a very rigid chain of command where, okay, the coaches don't talk about the draft at all, the scouts handle the draft part, and then the general manager makes the picks, and then the coaches have the players.
What kind of player do we want in linebacker? Let's ask our linebacker.
It's very much a partnership. Yeah. It's very much as it can be a consensus, and then when you have to make a decision, the general manager makes a decision.
I think as much as people piss on Hard Knocks and stuff, I think Hard Knocks does a really good job of showing that. Yeah. Showing a coach's only meeting where they're talking about players, and I think you get a very good sense of there are no secrets in any room who didn't like Brashad Perryman first and who liked him from soup to nuts.
Sure.
From the first day of the Combine to the day they draft that player, whomever that player is, whether it's Joe Flacco or Terrell Suggs or whether it's Brashad Perryman or whether it's Matt, whatever his name was, who couldn't play safety, a couple of Elam.
Matt Elam.
Right? All of the coaches were in on that. All of the scouts were in on that. All of the FUs that happen in March and April as they set a board. As the draft opens, they're all in a suit and tie, and they put the card in, and then the kid shows up, and then they have mini camps, and then 3 years later in this organization, everybody responsible for picking that guy is usually still around in this organization, and they all know, like, hey, I had an issue with his size. I didn't like his speed. I didn't like his study ability. I thought his coaches, all of that stuff plays out in a very real way, right? It really does.
But to go back to the point I was trying to make before we kind of, we veered off.
That's fine.
But with Steve Bisciotti, in terms of making the decision that he was going to extend John Harbaugh, making the decision 5 years ago as it played out that Eric DeCosta was going to succeed Ozzie Newsome at that point, you weren't going to, if you're Steve Bisciotti and there is not that kumbaya feeling between John Harbaugh and Eric DeCosta, you'd be insane to extend the head coach if he doesn't get along with your brand new general manager.
Yeah, because some idiot that ran the Redskins screams on the radio somewhere else that your general manager and your incoming general manager and your incumbent head coach don't like each other, and 2 weeks later the owner of the company has made a $50 million commitment and a 5-year commitment to keeping the band together. You're calling Steve Bisciotti an idiot for not understanding what you know better than he does, which is absurd. I mean, it's literally absurd.
We're going to get to something that I don't like, and I do have concerns about with Steve Bisciotti,
which is Ozzie Newsome's despot.
But and then on the flip side, if you're Steve Bisciotti and John Harbaugh, hypothetically speaking, if he wanted more power, if he wanted say over the 53-man roster, and we've seen these different scenarios play out. Some of them have worked out well around the league. Many of them have not worked out well around the league. But would it have made any sense at all if you're finally giving Eric DeCosta his shot to be the guy after he stayed here so long and turned down interview after interview after interview, and then you move the goalposts and say, well, Eric, you're going to be the general manager, but we're going to give John say over the 53-man roster. That wouldn't have made any sense either. Now, to get to the part that I do have, I'm not going to say a full-blown critique that I hate it, but I have concerns about it, is you have a general manager who's a Hall of Fame general manager, has been the only general manager this organization has known, stepping aside. However, you've been insistent on the fact that he's going to remain in a, quote, significant role. We don't know what that role is just yet. It still has not been defined publicly. For all we know, we don't know if it's been completely defined privately. We don't know that yet. But anyone will tell you in any line of work, when you are the decision maker and you step aside, but then you don't really step aside, and the new guy that's in your former role, that's a problem or that can potentially be a big problem, having that former guy still in the picture, still having influence. And look,
Ozzy has been portrayed by my partner, Brian Billick, as well as everybody else, as like the most humble guy behind the scenes. This might be something as though Ozzy's the smartest football guy every one of them knows. Yeah. They would all tell you that. And they would say, if we can have Ozzy around, and I can hear Steve saying this, if I can have Ozzy Newsome here 2 days a week to just look at, here are the 3 things Ozzy was the best at doing. Identifying X, Y, and Z, whatever those 3 strengths are. And Eric is really comfortable with leaning on Ozzy to look at film of this or to evaluate that or to be a liaison on the other. That's probably a reason to do that. But on the flip side, everywhere else in every other walk of life, this would be a red flag.
It would.
It would be a red flag.
Would. And that's not to say that it won't work out.
Not a red flag on fire, but just a red flag is what it is. It's a flag that comes up that says warning. It's a warning sign.
It's great to talk about it in the context of how you just laid it out.
And I'm sure that's the way they would.
That it's positive and he's going to be an asset. However, what happens when you botch your first pick? And look, the Ravens have botched picks. You just laid out a few names.
Well, you're not going to blame it on Ozzy at that point.
But it's not blaming it on Ozzy. It's if John Harbaugh's didn't really love a certain guy as much as, say, the scouts and Eric did, or vice versa. John Harbaugh really loved a certain player, and the scouts maybe had their reservations, and they made that pick. Then it starts to become, okay, whose fault is it? And then if there is a disagreement, Ozzy, the guy who used to make the decision, is still around. And not to say that would be a problem, but let's face it. Strip away the Ravens name, and you're just talking about any other organization in the NFL. Heck, any business. And you're talking about the decision maker who's been there for 2+ decades. Suddenly, he's not the decision maker anymore. His right-hand man becomes that decision maker, yet that guy's still going to be there in a prominent role. That's not typically how businesses operate and function at the highest of levels. Now, Eric and Ozzy have such a unique relationship and friendship. Maybe it will be absolutely fine, but I know talking to people who are in very prominent roles, business-wise, and even
it has
in
been
the
something I think it's widely talked about. Sure,
it's odd. I mean, it is not what you typically expect to see. And look, it might just be that the Ravens are doing this in a way that Ozzy is going to have some kind of role, but maybe it isn't going to be as, quote, significant as they're portraying it to be. But they want to honor him in a way that they're not just making it out to be that, okay, he's going to be in the building 50 days a year and he's going to be semi-retired. And, yeah, they might have him go scout a certain player or talk to Nick Saban down in Alabama about a certain prospect, but he's not going to be as involved. We don't know. Again, there's no defined role to this point, and we don't know how this is going to work out. But if we take it at face value that he is going to have a significant role, I don't know. I just that's something that I have some reservations about. That
I'm sure they've done a lot of praying and talking about it.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure they have.
As much as we're sitting here talking about it, you don't think that's been a large
and this has been something that's 5 years in the making.
These are all really smart guys. They know it doesn't normally work this way.
Yeah, it is.
They know guys like us would be talking about it.
But I'll also say this, going back to what we said kind of at the beginning of our conversation, that hope that Eric DeCosta is going to revamp and do some things differently. Is it easier doing that when the guy that used to be in charge isn't really in the picture anymore at all? Or he's still in the building 5 days a week and there's even a subconscious feeling of not wanting to hurt his feelings?
I'm just wondering if Eric got a bigger office. That's all I want to know. You know. Luke Jones is here. He's Baltimore Luke on Twitter. And, of course, we're here at Super Bowl 53. All of our coverage brought to you by our friends at King Discount Liquors. Make sure you get out to see Paul King. Give the King a ring for all of your booze and spirits to keep your spirits up for the big game. They are in Rosedale. Go see Johnny Bev and give him a call. I was going to Johnny Bev beer, but I let that go. I'll have Mike Tenier come by from Bleacher Report and get the Johnny Bev beer going on. Also brought to you by our friends, and of course we have them all over town at Amici's. Coming down to Little Italy. Make sure you get the Ponte Rotundo, take it home, and enjoy the the football holiday, man. They got the meatballs there. They got the delicious Pane Rotondo. Take home some Ziti La Rosa as well. Go see them down at High Street in Little Italy. I saw Chef Rolando last week. So we got a football game here. We're live on Radio Row. We got a full week. We've had some bad weather around here in Atlanta. But all of us can be found in the BayaToyota.com audio vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn Radio app. We do come in crystal clear from anywhere in the world. I'm Nestor. He's Luke. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Tassa, Baltimore. And we never stop talking Baltimore sports.